Peter Parker, the Amazing Spider-Man, a character that many of us grew up with, rather it be the movies, the cartoons, and the comics. And if you couldn't tell, I'm a pretty big fan of the web swinger. I grew up watching the Sam Raimi movie trilogy, Mark Webb movie duology, and the animated series, Spectacular Spider-Man. As for comics, the Todd McFarlane era always fascinated me as a kid, and I'd say it was a good starting point. A character that represents a classic quote, "With great power comes great responsibility." Or so he used to. Nowadays, it's kinda hard to say if Peter Parker's Spider-Man represents that anymore. But how did we get to this point? Getting straight to the point, even if you're not too familiar with Spider-Man comics, you must have heard about One More Day at least once, possibly one of the most infamous comic storylines ever that solidified Marvel's decision to not make Peter a character that progressively matured by undoing years of history with his marriage with Mary Jane via an overly forced and convoluted means, leading to Brand New Day and Dan Slott's run on Spider-Man that was for more than a decade. To comment on Dan Slott's run, for as much as he writes Peter as a self-destructive person that is definitely on the polar opposite of someone trying to be a responsible person, he at least brought some creative concepts and storylines like the Spear Spider-Man. But his love for Mary Jane is portrayed as something that just cannot work at all, which really goes against the dynamics of what makes this couple work thematically and story-wise. It's the idea that these two can love each other even with the hardship of one of them being a superhero and the fear and danger that brings. One of the best descriptions Mary Jane gives is that her life is like being the wife of a cop, but she can't tell anyone about it. And every night she's afraid that he might not come home. Peter does get new love interests in this run like Silk, Carly Cooper, and Mockingbird, but those relationships are hardly developed, with one of them being the result of spider pheromones. While I'm at it, there's a high chance I might even be blocked by Dan Slott on Twitter for saying any of this. He's known for spending most of his time on that site blockchaining anyone giving negative feedback and pretty much anyone associated with it. So there's a possibility that you might be blocked without even interacting with him once if you're on that side of Twitter. The number of people he has blocked is probably bigger than the FBI's most wanted list. Now, granted, there is a huge difference between a toxic comment and constructive criticism, but when a writer's main shtick is to write controversial stories for the sake of reader engagement, only to allow positive feedback, it just comes off as ill-willed not just to those critical, but potential readers who might get into Spider-Man comics. Now, a recurring plot point that you'll soon see again is Peter's life hitting rock bottom with his relationships being soured. Don't get me wrong, Spider-Man stories aren't new to bittersweet to downright tragic endings. Sometimes it's the result of something out of Peter's control, and sometimes it's the result of an irrational decision Peter made. But with every strain on his social life, and with every tragedy, Peter grows as a person, rather it be to better himself as Spider-Man or to cope, which is one of my favorite aspects of the character. Even characters like Flash Thompson, Harry Osborn, and Mary Jane changed over the years. Even Mr. Jameson changed as a person. After Dan Slott dropped being the lead writer for The Amazing Spider-Man, the series relaunched with Nick Spencer writing. While admittedly the Kindred storyline could have gone a lot more smoother, the start of the run where Peter confronts how out of character he's been, then him rebuilding his broken relationships, and how he eventually breaks down as a person is really great. You can tell that this run was a response to how Spider-Man has been written prior, going as far as building up Peter getting ready to propose to Mary Jane and Mephisto giving a good reason on why he wanted to erase Peter's marriage with her and their future daughter, which is unlikely to ever be followed up. Now we are at the current relaunch of The Amazing Spider-Man with Zeb Wells as the writer. Once again, Peter's life hits rock bottom, and his relationship with everyone is soured, but this time, there is a mystery behind it. I get that Marvel would want to revert Peter's life to something more marketable, but even during storylines such as the Clone Saga, Peter as a mature man in a stable relationship always opened the door for so much story potential, like in Kraven's Last Hunt or the death of Harry Osborn. He didn't need to constantly repeat character arcs to be a great character, so you shouldn't be surprised if someone prefers the movie continuity or the Insomniac version of Spider-Man over Earth 616 Spidey. If Marvel really wanted to capitalize on a younger Spider-Man, they already got Miles Morales. Speaking of, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a fantastic animated movie that showed audiences a Spider-Man who has the heart and charisma that makes one, all while giving him his own identity and personality. Spider-Verse comics, on the other hand, are an entirely different animal. There are big events that gather different Spider people, old and new, and since Dan Slott is writing, a lot of them have to be cynically killed off for shock value. Think of it like how the Transformers animated movie killed off most of that show's original cast and Optimus Prime to introduce the new one, or how the G.I. Joe animated movie was supposed to kill off Duke and replace him and the Joes that were imprisoned with a new line of Joes. The cost of having different Spider people as a supporting cast is that we hardly get any characters that are a part of Peter's social life, or at least characters who aren't as memorable. Imagine if the supporting cast of Spectacular Spider-Man were all superheroes too, instead of, well, ordinary people. It takes away the relatability from it. Spider-Man 2022 by Dan Slott is the start of another Spider-Verse story, and it's self-aware about it. Given how this is supposed to be a direct follow-up to Edge of the Spider-Verse 2022, not Edge of the Spider-Verse 2014, it gets confusing. It just comes off as Marvel's Editorial being overly focused on multiple OC Spider people and not Earth 616's Peter Parker. I firmly believe that the editorials behind Spider-Man comics are out of touch with their reader base. A prime example was during C2E2, where after the crowd cheered at the idea of Peter being married again and going back to a more maturely written character, editor C.B. Cebulski just shot that down. Now, understand that the powers editors have over writers can drastically change the direction of a story. Despite J. Michael Straczynski being known as the writer of the last maturely written run on Amazing Spider-Man, Joe Quesada's intervention is what resulted in stories such as Sins Past and One More Day. During a panel in D23 Expo 2022 celebrating 60 years of Spider-Man, led by Nick Lowe and C.B. Cebulski, One More Day is described as a book that's debated upon rather than being infamous, probably to sell copies of the hardcover re-release. C.B. Cebulski had this to say about Gwen Stacy.
Yep, and then, in my opinion, and don't boo me, Gwen Stacy will be the eternal love of Peter Parker's life. However, soon after this, we met.
Yep. Who do we meet?
Mary Jane.
Yeah, Mary Jane Watson.
Which honestly explains a lot. Like, why Peter and Mary Jane are portrayed as a couple that just can't be together. Why Mary Jane is hardly written as a character anymore, but instead someone just to be put in covers. And Gwen's more recent appearances. Ironically, Gwen Stacy in the comics is hardly like how she was in the Amazing Spider-Man movies. She didn't even know Peter's secret identity. Meanwhile, Mary Jane grew to be a much stronger character in emotional support and personality for decades. It's really a shame since Mary Jane was honestly one of the most progressive female comic book characters ever, especially for her love interest, and seeing this character get this diluted over the years comes off as misogynistic. Unsurprisingly, for a panel that's supposed to be a big retrospective on Spider-Man comics, the end of the panel skips over the Nick Spencer run and goes straight into the current one.
Their love letter to the Amazing Spider-Man annual #1. We bring back the Sinister Six, the original Sinister Six, and they're joined, and Spider-Man has to join them and become part of the Sinister Seven? What? Pick it up. It's incredible.
Between this and the editorial announcing that Marvel Comics are being made just to be adapted into the MCU a decade later, I'm really uncertain for the future of Spidey. So, what now? Well, the new status quo is that, for reasons yet to be revealed, Spider-Man's personal life is in shambles yet again, Mary Jane is with someone else and seems to have had children for years, and after nearly getting killed from the Vulture of all villains, Peter now works for Norman Osborn, who's no longer a villain after an overly forced and convoluted means from the Nick Spencer run. And Spider-Man's back to acting like a socially awkward high schooler. It's obvious that Amazing Spider-Man's main selling point is baiting readers with the will they won't they between Peter Parker and Mary Jane, and the mystery box storytelling that's surely to be dragged out like the Kindred plot thread. While that kind of storytelling can plausibly work, when put in the format of one comic issue every 2 weeks, with hardly much story content per issue, topped off with how much comics are getting more expensive, readers of Amazing Spider-Man are bound to drop the title from their pull box. I want to be wrong, and hope that Spider-Man comics can be amazing again. I know a common strawman argument against those who aren't hooked into the current run is that we just want to see Peter again with Mary Jane. The truth is, I want to see Peter Parker facing hardships in his life and trying to balance being a superhero and having a love life, which was the point of Spider-Man 2. But the last couple years of Spider-Man comics have been flat-out misery porn. It's crazy how Spider-Man as a character has practically been in limbo, while the X-Men and even Venom have changed drastically. Now granted, the X-Men going back to being a school of mutants in hiding after everything that happened in their mutination of Krakoa, and Venom going back to being another Spidey villain after becoming Captain Universe and then the King in Black, would be extremely asinine to Marvel, but I don't want to give them any ideas. Oh no. Even Superman managed to be a family man in the comics and now in other media. This is why I recommend reading Invincible, since in a nutshell, it's like the drama of Spider-Man and the action of Superman put together without any of the retcons or character regressions. It even pokes fun at the idea of a rebooted timeline at one point. As for modern Spider-Man comics, the best advice I can give right now is to vote with your wallet. There will be storylines and runs I'll be interested in, like Spider-Man The Lost Hunt, but as for the ongoing story, I think I'll take a break.